generally that's not going to be done and is not within the legislative body's authority to dictate.
Councilmember Gabler has a question.
So there are a couple things that I'm questioning. First, yes, the letter that we all signed requests a level of detail that's pretty significant. However, what you're telling us is that we can make budget decisions at the program level. And I had previously asked, for instance, you mentioned the police department, to even get total costs for the programs within the police department, because that is not in the budget. So for us to even make decisions at the program level, we would need to have costs, expenses for those programs, all the different divisions and bureaus within the police department, and we currently don't have that.
Okay. You want to do, well,
Well, that's not a legal question for me, and I think that Ms. Newman will speak to that. I don't know if you want to speak to it now or reserve that question.
well, why don't we show, let's try the legal questions first, and then we'll come back. Councilmember Pico, do you have a legal question?
It wasn't really a legal question. I was going to jump basically on top of what she said, but it may impact this just a little bit, so let me run real quick. Use the example repeatedly, the Parks Department and, youth sports. And they actually went down to that level of detail. I just happened to pull up the police department funding line in here, and it's got operating. Okay, and then you go down here and funding changes, and that's it. You've got increases to different programs, increases or decreases, changes, but you don't have that program. So it's just as easy to put the program cost of what the increases or decreases were for, but the programs themselves are not listed. And that's kind of the issue that we're all coming down to. So to the extent that that's a legal question, I send it to you, and if it's administrative questions, I send it to Ms. Laura.
Councilman Pico, let me just take a stab at answering it this way. Early when I began discussing this, I indicated that the language in the charter said that the mayor submits the budget with the degree of detail that he may deem advisable. And so that's the case. But when it comes time for the council to add or remove programs or increase or decrease amounts, that's within your prerogative to do. And if you have questions of Ms. Newman and the city administration can assist you with that element, they can, that's something to take up with her.
Councilmember Pico.
Okay, well, the issue is that we don't have those program numbers to increase or decrease from. All we have is the funding changes from the previous year.
Right.
So how are we supposed to do that? The only line that is, the only couple of lines that are there are either the salaries or operating. And then down here, you've got this increase to multiple trending lines, which means absolutely zero. So from a legal perspective, if you don't know what the programs are, how are we supposed to add or decrease unless you're talking about the entire department? There analyze the problem.
I understand.
Okay, let's go to Councilmember Knight, and we'll come back to Councilmember Miller.
Okay, on the legals, and these are all just legal. I'll keep it that way. So you referenced 440I in the charter. And there's actually, the way I read it, there are two separate deliverables under 440I. On or before the first Monday in October of each year, the mayor shall furnish to the council estimates in writing of the probable expenses, specifying detailed probable expenses, including a statement and then using your words, blah, blah, blah. So that's deliverable number one. Okay, deliverable number two, at the same time or in such a later date in the year as fixed by council, the mayor shall prepare and present to council the annual budget. And the qualifying on the budget is that it may be deemed advisable to the department in such detail as the mayor may deem advisable. That's strictly on the budget. The definition of specifying detailed probable expenses is not, as I read this paragraph, up to the mayor. It is up to us to decide what we need in detail to be able to do our rights on what detail we need on probable expenses. So I think we're totally within our right. And then paragraph, now switching over to the city code, yes, you're right, 1.5.102, I just looked it up, does say after the budget is approved, then the CFO shall go forth and divide them into all accounts. So that process, indeed, that information is to be done after the budget is approved. But that draft to get to all these roll-ups is there. And so under 1.2.206, are we not in our rights that says if we need that detail to be able to make some budget determinations, we have the right to request for that? Fully agree that, you know, we cannot make it a major budget determination that down to the paperclip level, but if we need to know the information down to the paperclip level so that we know that, and since we have requested that within 1.2.206, in accordance with the first part of 4-40I of specifying what that detail is, I think we have been totally within our rights. And reading what the judge is going to talk to us a little bit later here on violations of city code of $500 or 90 days. So roll all that together and answer that non-question.
Well, Councilman Knight, let me say first that I agree with you in part, okay? And not as far as you'd probably like, but I agree with you in part. And the part is that this does specify two different things. And what they do is, when the budget document is presented, they bind those things together. It's all presented in one document. They've got the estimates in writing of the probable expenses to be incurred in the several departments of the city for the ensuing fiscal year, specifying in detail probable expenditures. They may not be providing you with the level of detail which you think detail means. And I'll grant you that the detail may be subject to some debate, but they do present that in that one document, both that statement of expenditures. Now, the detail that's provided is it provides the detail for each of those appropriating departments. Those are the several departments. And it gives you, at least for each of those departments, 3 numbers of probable expenditures. It gives you the total labor cost, which is specifying in detail, including a statement of the salaries, and then it includes a statement of the operating expenses, and it includes a statement regarding the amount of capital expenditures. Again, I mean, we're trying to read this consistent with the other provisions of the charter,
But the budget itself, as presented, I agree with you. The level of detail, salaries, operating expenses, capital outlay, CIP, debt service, I think are the 5 categories. You know, reading the second half of 440I, that is the mayor's purview as to how much detail he wants to provide per department. Now, you're going back up to the first half. Now, if we as council want to accept that as a single document, that's fine, but I see we as council have a legal right to, on the first half, of specifying in detail probable expenditures. We have the right to specify what that detail is. And if that detail, what we're finding is what was in the budget, if it would have been acceptable, all fine and happy. 9 of us assigned a document that says for that second half, that detail is not required, and we would like a little bit more so that we can define programs. And we did that through a request that we're empowered to do under 1.2.206.
Okay. Yeah, the first part does speak, and it says, in specifying in detail, the part about the budget, the latter section also uses the term detail, and it says, so prepared shall be in such detail as to the aggregate sum and the items thereof allowed to each department. And so, you know, reading the 2 parts consistently, both your estimate of the expenses you're going to have, and then the budget detail, and the budget detail being in such form as the mayor may deem advisable, you know, reading those consistently, I wouldn't say that that the overall thrust is to require a much greater level of detail in that first portion than the last portion
But in
regarding the budget.
reading it, the way I read it in here is the level of detail for the budget book itself is the mayor's purview. The way 440I is written, that purview does not extend to the first deliverable. If it was, that is more of a council. And since we decided that that information is not detailed enough on the expenditures, we, through city code, requested additional detail in 1.2.206
Yeah.
per one, and that's something that should be honored, or it's a violation of code.
Well, Mr. Knight, there's also other probable expenses of the several departments. I mean, if there is outstanding bonded debt and there's a need for debt service on that, those obligations of the city, those are probable expenses that are known in advance. So they would be detailed. We have this much debt service we have to meet. And so when the budget down below is prepared in so much detail, those are going to be the detail on what you plan on spending money for. And when you add them all up, you have, together with the other types of debt that you have to pay, then you have the probable expenses to be incurred in those several departments. The expenses to be incurred in the several departments, I think, means all of them together. You add them together, and then you have that detail saying we got this much for bonded debt that you have to pay, and you have so much for this to meet these needs of these departments. I mean, we're not making real progress here, I think, but I think it's fair to say there's multiple ways of looking at that.
I agree with you. If we did an appropriation ordinance down to the account number and says you can only spend so much for office supplies and, by city council, and you can only spend so much for dog walking by city council, then we have definitely exceeded our rights and have definitely been speeding ourselves. But if we ask for that information that turns around and says, how much did you spend for dog walking last year, so that we can know, for that program, we're only asking for information. We're not appropriating down to that number. We're only asking for that detail to be able to make sound logical decisions. And under 1.2.206 is we figure we need that information to do our legislative duties.
Perhaps, Mr. Florzak, I could respond if there's not any more legal questions of exactly what we're
Well,
prepared
we
to.
have some more legal questions. Mr. Knight, did you have some more legal questions? Okay, Councilmember Miller has a legal question.
I guess I just, when you talk to the public and they were to read a sentence without legal training, when it says the city ensuring in the ensuing fiscal year specifying in detail probable expenditures, if they looked at that sentence in the charter and they looked at what we were given, I think 95% of the public would say, that's not in detail. I'm just going to leave it at that. And then on the bottom of that, as the mayor may deem advisable, and I guess my only point is, from a separation of powers, the mayor's interpretation of what he deems advisable might change if we don't pass a budget. So that's the other part. And then on the appropriation side of it, the appropriation is by ordinance to the several purposes. And so there's really no guidance as to the several purposes and how those are structured. And so, again, that will be left up to interpretation, and I'm sure that the attorney's office will have one interpretation of that, and we may or may not be in the same line. So I don't think it's unreasonable what's being asked for, to establish major legislative budget determinations. It is not possible to do with the level of detail that we got. So we cannot do our duties that we're assigned by the charter with the level of detail that we're currently providing. We're not talking about one or two of us trying to dig in the weed. There's 9 of us who asked for this. And it's to me, it's having this discussion about whether we should have asked for it or not, I think is pointless, because I think we're of a like mind here. And if we're going to move forward with this budget, which we have a legislative direction to do. We have ordinances that support us asking for that. I don't understand why this is such a roadblock, honestly.
I appreciate your feelings. I appreciate the statement you've made. And I think that, you know, the providing information to the council is an entirely separate thing than the provision of the budget formally under the charter to the council. While I understand the reasonableness, at least partially at least, I understand the reasonableness of a request for information. The fact that you get all the information, it may help you understand and work with the budget in a more knowledgeable fashion, but it doesn't mean that you can then play with the little details of the information that you're provided. And again, after you're done with discussing this with me, I think Ms. Newman does plan on discussing with you the provision of information to the council so that you will have a better understanding of some of those details.
Councilmember Miller.
I guess to follow up, just in general terms, in your opinion, when we were to allocate to, at the program level, let's say, I mean, right now, there's how many appropriating departments? 5?
Five.
So your interpretation, Mr. Florzak, if we appropriate a certain amount of funds to Parks and Public Works, and it is the mayor's decision after that appropriation takes place that he's going to take $2 million from Parks operations and he's going to spend the money on a Public Works project that's within the same department, is there anything precluding him from doing that under your interpretation?
I would think that if there were a major legislative determination,
And how would we state that?
if in your appropriation ordinance you designate it, I'm not saying that this will work. I don't think if you declare that it's a major legislative determination that you know, $50 shall be spent in the police department for paper clips, that doesn't fly. But on the sense that you think that in a very large budget, you do have the authority to add or delete programs and increase programs or amounts, delete or decrease programs or amount, or add or increase programs or amounts, that you can, in your amendments, specify a program that you want to designate and designate an amount for that program. And so if you had indicated the example was Public Works and Parks, if there was a program undertaken by Parks and you want to designate that should be increased to X dollars, then, and with or without any designation, I hate to speculate on details and have you think that I'm saying one thing and I'm saying another, but I think we acknowledge that your authority with respect to your ability to amend the budget goes down to the level of programs. And so, but once you adopt a budget and you adopt it with appropriations for a department, if you do not make a determination with a breakout like you're talking about, then yes, under the current charter and code, the mayor can move money around within a department.
But so, since we don't have the budget in those program details, how can we even do that? That's the whole issue. So we can't give major legislative budget determinations based on program because we don't have the budget down to even to the program level of detail.
Well, hopefully the presentations that have been made before council during the past week and a half and will be ongoing will help supply some of that information to you. I can't speak to, I was here for only one afternoon, for part of an afternoon, and I don't know what the level of detail has been, but you know, I am speaking in terms of what is the authority of the city council to make these program amendments. And I appreciate that you are expressing some detail because there's an information gap.
Right,
And I think that Ms. Newman, again, will help speak to that gap and things that maybe can close it.
Okay, Councilmember Martin.
Tom, I just want to give an example and see how that fits in what you're telling us. 2 years ago, we added money for tennis court repair and code enforcement. And what I hear you saying now is we can't even offer those kinds of suggestions.
Well, let me help here, because Tom wasn't here for that budget
Right.
season, okay?
But
And I think, based on the memo that you have in front of you, without a statement of a major legislative budgeting determination, what we tell you is that money specifically for tennis court construction is part of that capital maintenance. It's the construction of the tennis court is not a program, okay? But you can adjust the amount in that capital line in the budget as an amendment to the budget and include it as a line item in the appropriation ordinance. That's how you get to that one. With regard to the code enforcement, it was always focused on officers, okay? Based on the memo that we have prepared, what we're saying is that you can go to code enforcement as an element or a program within the police department and say, council supports code enforcement. We feel we need more presence in the community. We need to strengthen the program. We're adding X dollars to the code enforcement program within the police department. And then that becomes the amendment to the program, which is reflected as a line item in the appropriation ordinance. Did that help?
Well, yeah, and I hope that you're right. You're our best source at this point. For example, if we wanted to this year, there's a gap of $1.1 million in parks for watering. Could we, in our appropriation, appropriate that $1.1 million? Let's just say, I don't know how this will all play out, but let's just say from the fund balance. And our appropriation is, we're going to take $1.1 million from fund balance, place it into parks, and designate it for parks watering. Do we have that authority?
Assuming that parks watering is a program, if that's a program, then you can specify and you can appropriate that amount of money for parks watering. That's kind of even though it's a large amount of money, it's a lower level detail. But it is your appropriation ordinance. You can take that step. I know it's an important matter and it's been before the council a number of times. It's just that I can't absolutely commit on a hypothetical like that. But
Well, Tom, what we've been told previously is that we can designate that in our appropriation. And, or I don't care what it is, code enforcement officer, tennis courts, whatever. And the mayor can veto, we can override a veto and send it back with those changes in it, but the mayor does not, or the mayor of the executive branch does not have to apply those funds based upon our request. And I guess that's what I'm asking, is it worth our time to even try to consider changes to our budget at that level?
Councilmember Martin, it is worth your time to try and spend the effort. And I think using the same analogy as what Ms. Massey had said, to be clear, I think what I heard her saying is the discussion may be with council on whether to hire one more code enforcement officer or not, because you have too many dilapidated houses or junked vehicles in front yards. But council can't say we're going to appropriate $50,000 more to add one more code enforcement officer. But what you can do is, in the program first you could find out from the administration that it's going to cost, with salary and benefits, $50,000 to have a code enforcement officer. And then when you appropriate funds, you can put a line item increase for the program code enforcement, which you increase by $50,000. And so by doing that, you've made that determination and you've increased that program amount.
But there's no obligation to do that, is there, on the executive side?
This gets back to that whole discussion about what is a major legislative budgeting
Right.
determination. And the opinion, the way I remember the final version, was that you cannot force the executive to spend per the appropriation, but but the executive can't spend that money on anything else. Is that a fair?
That's fair. If that is a major legislative determination, then the money either is not spent and goes to the unrestricted fund reserve, or gets spent on that program. And so likewise, going back to your original question with parks watering, I'm at a disadvantage not seeing the budget and what it actually says. But assuming that there's a program there of parks maintenance, for example, we know that parks maintenance involves a number of expenditures, and one of them would be the cost of water for parks. And if it needs an extra $1.1 million, and you can increase the parks maintenance budget by an amendment made via the appropriation ordinance to increase it by that much, whether the council shares its comments or rationale for doing those things is up to the council. But then that's certainly your prerogative to do that.
Councilmember Knight.
Yeah, let me follow up on that, please. I mean, so, and actually regress a little bit. Tom, I think you and I are on the same page. The ordinances versus the details, you know, the knowledge gap that we need to make sound decisions versus the ordinance itself. And I agree with you, the ordinance itself, we can't have major budget, legislation budget determinations for every single account number. You know, you only have, you know, a few silver bullets. You don't have a whole, you know, ammo can full of them. But I remember somewhere very, very early in our time on council that the city attorney cited a case, I don't know if it was Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, where garbage collection was done by the city, and it was for like residential. And city council went in and said, no, we want you to include businesses. They appropriated the money. The mayor decided no, he didn't want to do that, so did not send it. They went into court, and that's the first time I heard this major program. Said, no, council did tell you. So on 3 or 4 things, let me finish that thought, I'm sorry. My mind got ahead of me. You know, the court ruling was council did make this a major legislative budgeting determination, and so the mayor did have to start doing trash pickup for businesses as well as residential. But those were, you know, a specific item, and it wasn't the entire budget, but this one thing. So, I mean, if we were to go in and say, you know, city council, your budget is, you know, $500K, and we want you to spend, you know, $2.50 on paper clips, that can't be, you know, that can't be a major budgeting. There's got to be sanity on there. But if we did take one thing like park watering and say, here is another 1.2 on the general fund, and it must, or 1.1 out of the general fund, and you must water to the same levels that you did last year, or, you know, twice a week or something like that. You must keep the parks green. And that was the only thing we put in parks. Then I'm thinking that's something that would have to be done. But most of the appropriations that we appropriate, they don't have to be spent unless we use 1 or 2 of our silver bullets.
Again, Councilmember Knight, I agree with you certainly in part, and maybe most of what you said that time. And I agree that there's a rule of reason that has to be applied to this whole determination. And I looked for the Philadelphia garbage case this weekend and was going to read it, could not find that case. But bear in mind that both our courts here in Colorado and most of the other jurisdictions that have taken up this whole separation of powers issue in the context of budgets, they all address it on a case-by-case basis. And the Constitution of Pennsylvania or the Charter of the City of Philadelphia is different than the Charter of the City of Colorado Springs. And so while some of the principles are persuasive, that we do have to be careful. And so if we were looking at that with the City of Colorado Springs and the charter here, and you said, you know, council believes and will make a major legislative determination that trash all over our community is adverse to the best interests of the community, is discouraging economic development, whatever, and you appropriated $500,000 for a program to implement enhanced trash collection and recycling efforts. Once you do that, you can't specify, though, that the mayor shall implement the program by contracting it out to commercial trash haulers. It's up to him. He could hire city